Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today, I'm very excited to talk to May Cobb, or as her handle says, Killer May. Welcome, May.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Thank you. I enjoyed this book so much. It's called A Likeable Woman, and it is out now. It is deliciously wicked. It's a great thriller. Are all of your books this way?
Yeah, I feel like they are. My previous two novels, The Hunting Wives and My Summer Darlings, they were even more sort of salacious and booze-laden and debaucherous. And this one, I tried to have some of that like crazy East Texas element, but then also I wanted to do more of like a traditional Agatha Christie closed circle mystery, just as a kind of a challenge to myself.
Well, it was delicious and wonderful. So let's talk about East Texas. So this is where the book is set. I feel like we really get an exact idea of what East Texas is like from your book. But I also feel like we could pick up this location and drop it off in Minnesota or Iowa, as long as, the dynamic stayed the same. Do you feel like that's something you were intent on doing?
I always, this is my fourth novel and they're all set in East Texas, but I was trying to make sort of that going back home story feel as universal as possible.
And I think you totally nailed it. I mean, we have aspects of family, old friends, secrets, and these are the things that, of course, we encounter in everyday life, but what makes such a great mystery. So give us a little setup about what the story is about.
Yeah, so, and I just have to hold up, I love this cover so much. They really knocked it out.
Totally agree.
Yeah, so A Likeable Woman follows Kira, who's a 30-something woman, and she's living in Los Angeles, like you, Dan.
Yes.
And she fled her tiny East Texas town a couple of decades ago in the wake of her, provocative mother's mysterious death. Everyone told her she was a teenager that, her mother, Sadie, had committed suicide. But Kira never believed it. She and her mom, Sadie and Kira, were best friends, simpatico. They both made art together. Soulmates, if that word, means something, that's what they were. And she and her mother was about to have her first art showing, and then she died. And so Sadie was just Kira never believed that her mom would do that. But everyone around her was just, the gaslight was on. Yes, she did. You're crazy. So she left. She never wanted to go back. But then her frenemy has a pool party, and she sends her an invitation. And then her grandmother, Granny Foster, who's this sort of like manipulative matriarchal character, starts texting Kira and says, "Are you coming home? You might want to, because I have something of your mother, something she was keeping in secret, and I think you're right about the way she died." So that's kind of the setup. And it's a book within a book, because what the grandmother has is an unpublished memoir of Sadie's that does have clues in it.
It's wonderful because there are all these things to lure Kira back, and she doesn't want to go. And I find that, in looking back, there are things that we experienced years earlier that inform who we are today, and we might not want to go back. I mean, there are plenty of things in my life I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I don't want to hang out with these people. But then something comes along, and you've done such a masterful job at giving Kira a reason that she has to go back, even though she definitely doesn't want to. Thank you. So she has a sister, Katie, who is older than her. I believe Katie's a little older, right?
Yeah, she's like 2 years older.
Yeah, and it's funny because I really began to think about the people I've met along the way, and you know, suicide or murder, both of those things are really big time, and it really does change everyone's path. The path they're going on is changed, and these sisters are so very different. Katie says, okay, this is the story. I'm sticking with it. Kira says, this doesn't feel right. And I enjoyed the dynamic between the two sisters. Did you have fun writing those?
I really did. Thank you so much. I did. And I also, I worked with a freelance editor, and she was really pushing me to dig deep with that relationship. So as you know, like it's like a simmering pot that eventually boils with those two. And I liked sort of the notion of, in families, like you said, when there's a tragedy, it changes people. But also I feel like sometimes battle lines can be drawn in family. So, Katie was daddy's girl and Kira was mama's girl. So they were already divided, and then boom, this happens. And are they ever going to get their relationship back?
And I do think that in real life, that really does mirror what happens. Not every sibling, my mom used to say, not everyone's the Osmonds. I mean, it just doesn't quite work that way. My mother and her sister, 60 years, they didn't talk to each other.
Wow.
They just hated each other. And I saw so much of, as you say, the battle lines are drawn. Yeah. And I also think if you stay where a tragedy has occurred or you escape, that also forms the character.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay. Ooh, I didn't think about that. I love that.
Yeah. Because, I mean, when you stay in a smaller town, you have to conform or else you stand out. And Sadie stands out. I find that what you've done also with Sadie and the people in Sadie's age bracket, you've given them voices of whether they were Sadie's friend or not. And I think that's a very powerful thing in that. What was your favorite older character outside of Sadie to write?
Gosh, that's a great question. I would probably say the Mike character. Yeah.
Yeah,
but also Granny Foster. I had yeah.
Yeah, so and with Granny Foster comes money. And money is something that I know that in some of your other novels, the class system has been very large. Here again, we have this system of those who have money and those who don't have money. I think that in a city like Los Angeles, sometimes that gets lost. I think in a place like Longview, it's very obvious who has and who doesn't have.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have fun writing the class distinction?
Yeah, I guess I'm obsessed with it. Someone asked me the other day, and I was like, I guess I really do. And I think part of that's probably like my childhood. Like for a hot minute, my very middle class parents were socialites. And it's such a long story and I won't go into it, but it was sort of like in the 70s, you could live in a small town and maybe if you owned a business, the banks would loan you money type of thing. And so you might look like you're in a certain class that maybe you're not, and not that there's anything shady. I can never show this one to my parents. But they would go to like the junior leagues charity ball, and they would, and they were very much running in those circles. And then the recession hit, their divorce happens. And then all of a sudden, like my mom's kind of operating like a single mom, working the graveyard shift at the hospital. We're living in a completely different house, and so I was very aware of that shift and sort of, there's a lot of oil money in East Texas, and we never had access to that. But maybe I would go to a slumber party at one of those houses. And I was always like, ooh, what is this? It's crazy. And so I think it's fascinating, especially when you're in this, like you said, you can tell in Longview. So you're in this little pond, and you have these big fish, and And then sometimes it's just evil.
I totally agree. I also find that generational money is different than new money.
Yeah.
So new money sort of puts you trying to be in the club with old money. Old money is very different. Old money doesn't have to brag about it because they have it. They
Yeah.
never think it's ever going away. And if it does go away, then of course that's a whole different book, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, I love that. You're so right. It's a completely different vibe. Yeah.
The art of touch is something that I saw run all through your book that I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but a lot of people don't like to be touched. A lot of people like to be touched. I'm a hugger. Not everyone's a hugger. And that is something that I noticed that you have fastened your characters to touch in different ways or not want to be touched. So now I have to ask you, are you a hugger?
I'm a hug fan. So here's my virtual hug.
Oh, thank you. Was that intentional or is that just something that happens organically with your characters? Because it was very big to me. I really, really appreciated it.
I love that you're saying that. I'm having the best time talking to you about my book. I honestly didn't think about it. So yeah, it just happened organically. Yeah.
I also want to quote a line that I wrote down because I was just so impressed by it. And grief is a scar tissue and mine is ripped open.
Oh.
And I felt all of Kira. And I mean, I felt Kira the entire book, but I really felt that. Do you want to talk a little bit about grief and how that factors in? I mean, you've talked some about it, but.
Yeah, I feel like for Kira, part of her, character arc and journey, and I didn't realize this till I was like maybe a third into the book, and I was like, okay, this is the emotional journey she's on. She has got to realize that her life is at a standstill, it's frozen, and when she lost Sadie, that was like her moment of arrested development. So she has to, and I think she's aware of that, but she's not aware that she's carrying around survivor's guilt.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
She has to have this awakening in order to go, okay, my mom would have never wanted me to stay stuck like this. What have I been doing? I need to move. Just because her dream died, she would never want this. She wouldn't want my dream to die. So I've got to process the grief and get, beyond it so I can live this life that, yeah.
And it was unique also, in the voices around Kira. So you've set up all through the book these people that she's not 100% sure whether they're on her side or not. And we see some of the characters shift, which I think is a natural thing that happens in life. She did have some people along the way say to her, you sort of got to snap out of it. And yet it wasn't always the people I thought would say that. So it was fun to navigate through that.
Thank you.
So now I want to talk about, because this is near and dear to my heart. This sadly will probably tell a lot more about me than anyone needs to know. I love Valium, and I just love the fact that Valium shows up in this book. My mother was a true believer in Valium, and she sort of passed it on to me. So I want to talk a little bit about, because I know that you've talked on other interviews about drinking and stuff. So this is something that, let's talk about coping mechanisms.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, first of all, I think Valium's a good drug.
Me too.
It really takes the anxiety away. And I feel like in Sadie's era, it was the early 90s, and I know that I gave her a 70s vibe, and I've been knocked a little bit about that over on Goodreads, that in a small town, pre-internet, it did feel like that still in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Other than maybe there's an Old Navy to shop at and not just like the vintage store. But that was her coping mechanism, were those pills. I mean, she's in an abusive marriage, verbally and physically. And, she's already like many artists, higher frequency, higher strung, more sensitive. And so she does over So Sadie's story, for the people that are listening, I said it over the last summer of her life. I wanted to give her story some sort of framework plot wise so that it wasn't just this rambling memoir. But there's a lot going on that summer. She's, kind of hooking up with this guy that seems like a kindred spirit, and she feels like she's being watched, and we don't know who the watcher is. So so she's got her prescription going, and that's her coping mechanism, and writing this memoir, which is kind of like a confessional to her daughter. It's her safe space, because she has that one true friend, but is she really? And she doesn't feel like she can share a lot with a lot of people. So,
and I think that there again, as I said earlier, it mirrors real life for a lot of people. I mean, there are things I share and things that I keep to myself. And I think if you are as Sadie is in your character in this book is, as you say, vibrating on a higher frequency, it is difficult. And I find that in communities, small or large, but in our circle of friends, there are people who applaud us and there are people who are jealous. And of course, how that comes out is what affects all the way we all behave.
Absolutely. It's so interesting. It's so interesting how sometimes we have to be on our guard, even when we have wonderful news to share.
Absolutely.
Yikes. Are you my friend? Are you my wild?
So you have included a special needs child in Aiden. And I will say that reading the scenes that Aiden is in, I was so impressed by the job you did. Congratulations on that. Was Aiden a character you wanted to include from the beginning, or did Aiden come into the story along as you were writing it?
Thank you for saying that. I tried to be very sensitive. Aiden is severely autistic, as is my own son. And so it was it kind of came out in the beginning because I wanted to show that the Jack character has a lot going on in his life. And it's a real challenge for him. And I also, we talk about representation. There is a lot more representation of autism. There's not still about the more profound cases. And I still feel like it's an invisible disability.
Mm-hmm.
When we go out in public, it's like open season. You either get people that really understand, or there's still just like a huge lack of awareness. And I'm not faulting the public for that. But so I feel very passionate about, one day I'd love to write a mystery where the sleuth is autistic. Anyway, I'm veering off track, but yeah, it was,
No.
I knew I wanted it, and I wanted to be sensitive about it, because even though I'm the parent of an autistic child, I'm not autistic myself. So I'm still a little nervous about the reception of that portrayal, because I didn't, as you can tell, pull any punches with it. I showed it in all its challenging glory.
Well, May, I really do want to say that was something that was very impressive to me, because it is easy for someone who isn't in that situation to not understand. It's nice to have allies who do understand and try to be supportive where possible. But I think that you gave such a lovely description, and it must be difficult to describe it to that detail, but it added a lot of humanity to this book for me. I felt as if I saw exactly what you described, and I really do commend you for that, because I thought that was excellent. Really, really excellent.
Thank you. That means a lot. It really does.
So now, to get off a little serious and to get on to, gossip figures into this as well. And that is something that I know it figures into some of your other novels as well. It's one of the things that what people say, I'm sort of naive, sort of like Kara is. Sometimes I just accept what somebody says, but gossip is a real mind scrambler. how fun is the gossip for you?
It's so much fun. I love it. I love it. I will never stop writing about it.
I know we probably should be saying, gossip is bad, but I have to tell you, gossip's really good to read.
It is. It's fun, and it's so human.
It is. It is. And I do, one of the things I did think about is, sometimes someone says, oh, Dan's wearing a red shirt. You can see I'm wearing a black shirt, but if someone says it's red long enough, people begin to believe Dan was wearing a red shirt. And I think that's once again true to life, because gossip it has a way of growing legs and just going out in every direction. Oh, May, do you have a website or social media you would like to share?
Yeah, my website is www.maycobb.com, MAYCOBB.com, and I'm on Instagram the most, and that's at May_Cobb.
I don't think it gets more direct than that, does it?
No.
Once again, the book is A Likeable Woman by May Cobb, and I can honestly say it is definitely a likable woman.
You, Dan, much for having me. This was such a blast. Truly.
It was so fun. Thank you, May, for joining me. Hang on for me just a second. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.